And welcome to the Benefit Whisperer podcast, hosted by Ralph Weber. Ralph, good to see you. How are you, my friend?
I'm great, Bill, and it's really good to be here with you too. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, I'm excited about this podcast for many, many different reasons, which we are going to get into over the course of this podcast. But let's start first with, there was that little brief formal introduction before we got talking about what you do and all of that kind of stuff. And I want to explore that. But before we do that, I'm just curious, how did you get into this? What led you into this particular business, Ralph? How did you get here?
Great question. I'm Canadian originally. I grew up in Asia and Europe. Came back here and I did a few things. I was in air traffic control. I was a commercial pilot. I worked in the corporate world for a while. And I decided that I really wanted to work closer with people, really, really help people, one-on-one. Mm-hmm. And one area that I had, really good expertise, was with numbers. So I said, how can I apply this, the people and the numbers? I don't want to be an accountant, but I looked at different things and I said, this is where I can really have an impact. And I started in the insurance world. But then, as time progressed, I decided I've gotten a lot of training, a lot of qualifications, a lot of, degrees and certifications. But I decided that most of my specialization is going to be in employee group benefits. I started that in Canada and then when I moved to the US, I just kept that going. And I found that healthcare is so expensive and a lot of people just can't afford it. Most bankruptcies in America are due to medical bills. Mm-hmm. Okay. Medical reasons are the cause for, I think, 66% of bankruptcies. Mm-hmm. So I decided, let me just really specialize and really find solutions for companies. And as we were talking before the podcast started, there's a big difference between companies that have 20 or less people to companies that have 200 or more. Okay. And we work with all of them, but they're two unique needs. It's kind of like a motorcycle and a Greyhound bus. Okay. They're both transportation, but they have unique needs. When you have 20 or less people, which is 89% of US businesses, you really are up close and personal. You're looking your people in the eye, you know them by name, you know their families. Whereas if you've got thousands of people, you know your direct reports. So they both have very unique needs. And we've been working with those two segments to really create a lot of different solutions for them.
Yeah, you will get no argument from anybody I know in terms of healthcare. And in fact, anybody who knows anything is going to agree with you that healthcare costs are enormously expensive, yet also enormously important and critical. I mean, the evolution of the company providing healthcare benefits and health insurance actually started back in the 50s here in the States, right? Where, it was like, how do we hire all these people? How do we entice people to come to work for us? And so they began throwing that benefit on, be like, hey, come to work for me and we'll do this for you and we'll provide this insurance for you.
Right.
That has ballooned into a cost for businesses that is staggering.
Absolutely. And it's growing at a much higher rate than inflation. Since the 50s, it's been about 3 times as high. And I wrote a book that goes through the history of healthcare in America since 1609. Okay, go right back to the original settlers and where the American way sort of started, where its roots were. I talk about the evolution of insurance in 1946 when the McCarran-Ferguson Act was passed, whereby the states would regulate insurance instead of the feds. And that's all important to understand. During World War II, there was a price freeze. You couldn't wage freeze. You couldn't increase wages. Mm-hmm. So that's when employers started, using benefits as the hook, and then there are certain things that happen that really explain why it is, where it is. And knowing that really helps people people like myself to really analyze and get into the intricacies and really create something that fits each employer, because every employer is different. Even two companies with both 20 people, both in the same industry, are going to be very different.
For those people who this podcast is serving as an introduction to you. You mentioned that you work with all kinds of companies and stuff. So just give us a real quick idea before we get into a little bit more of who Ralph is. Like, what kind of people? I think to question typically is what your ideal client. But what is your client look like?
Well, that's interesting. I have many different types of clients. No two are alike. And a lot of them will start by saying, hey, just, send me something by email that describes, what you do. And I really don't have anything because it's so unique. It's so different. I need to find out, what are your pain points? What can you afford? What do you want to afford? Would you rather pay your employees more and save a little bit on benefits, the other way around? Now, the benefit budget for most companies is the second biggest line item after payroll. And Starbucks spends more on benefits than they do on coffee beans. General Motors spends more on benefits than they do on sheet metal. So with such a huge segment, okay, and for businesses, there are three ways to increase profit. Number one, increase sales, but then you have all of the costs that come off of that. So $10 in sales doesn't equal $10 in profit. Cut expenses, and that is directly to the bottom line, but usually you're giving something up, giving up some of your marketing, some of your sales team, or you're making people work harder. But saving money on benefits goes directly to your EBITDA, directly to your bottom line. So that's where you can get creative. And when you look at the variation of pricing within the traditional PPO networks, you'll see a huge variation. I studied the state of Tennessee healthcare plan. They have 139,000 employees, 280,000 people. Within any given procedure, for example, CT scan of the abdomen, the median charges were $635. The high was $19,800 for CT scan.
Wow.
Colonoscopy, the average was $1,200. The high was $17,341. So seeing these variances.
Those are huge. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you, Rob, but I'm sitting here going, wait. Like, I can understand, $7 at this store and $10 at that store.
Right.
But not $600 at this store and $17,000 at that store. I'm sorry. I'm stuck there. What are you talking about?
It's absolutely crazy. And most of the time, these things are disguised. People don't see them. There's not a lot of transparency. Traditional insurance is a packaged product. Okay. It's sealed, right? And if you're a mechanic or an engineer that likes to tinker, you know that's something that you can't take apart and look at, you can't fix. Okay. So I like to take things apart and look inside and tune them instead of just throwing out the module and bringing in a new one. Now, sometimes that's what you need to do. But if you get to look inside, then you can see, why is there variation in pricing? Is it the hospitals that we're going to? Is it what they're charging? Is it the insurance company? So analyzing that is what helps us to really craft a custom plan.
We're going to be talking about this stuff over the course of the next bunches and bunches of podcasts. But I'm going to go to the heart of things for a moment here and ask you, there are a lot of different kind of benefits a company can offer.
Right.
There's compensation benefits, there's incentive benefits, there's bonus benefits. Why healthcare for you, Ralph? Why is it you're focused on healthcare?
Healthcare is just a part of it, Bill. I mean, it's not the whole thing. I also work with companies on succession planning, executive planning. There are a lot of other strategies. It doesn't start there, but that is the starting point because that's where I can have the most impact. We've got a company that has roughly 400 people on their health plan. And the first year we saved them $1.5 million. The second year, $1.9 million. The third year, 1.7. Each year we've decreased their costs when the market trend is an increase. Now, it takes a lot of work, okay? Doing the easy thing is definitely easier. It's a lot less work, but it's a lot more cost. We do the hard thing because it's the right thing to do, not because it's the easy thing to do.
Fascinating. This is going to be a terrific podcast. And just as an aside, I'll remind you later, if you're listening to this for the first time, Be sure you hit subscribe and follow, because I don't think you're going to want to miss any of the episodes of this podcast. So let's learn a little bit more about Ralph. Who is Ralph Weber? I mean, what do you do in your community? Are you active in your community? What kind of personal things do you do for yourself? Not for other companies, but Ralph and the family.
Great question. Yeah, I like to travel a lot. When I go out to visit clients, I like to take a day or two extra when I can. I like to take my family when I can. I can't always do that. I spend a lot of time with my family, a lot of time at home. I swim. I belong to a gym. And, I try to stay active whenever I can. There are some times of the year where I just don't have the time. There are some times when I could have triple the staff and still be busy.
Yeah.
So during those times, I have to curtail some of that. But traveling is what I like most. I've got family scattered, throughout North America and Europe, and getting out to see them is important to me. So I do spend a lot of time traveling.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, you mentioned you grew up in Asia. Where?
Bangkok. I moved out there. I just turned 5 years old, moved to Thailand. And I lived in Thailand for 10 years. I lived in Nepal for 2 years. We spent our summers in Germany because my family was German. Even though I was born in Canada, they moved to Canada just before I was born. So that was how I grew up. And it was interesting, Bill, living in different countries, 5 different countries, 3 different continents.
Mm-hmm.
I got to see a lot of difference in people. And I really have always been fascinated by cultures, by ways of thinking, even by intricacies of language. English is my 3rd language. And I used to really struggle because I'd think something in German and I'd translate it literally and it would just come out all wrong. And it just wouldn't make sense.
Yeah. Actually, let's keep on that line, because I was sitting here thinking, I'm curious how all of those different experiences sort of informed your worldview, or Weltanschauung, to go to your native tongue today. How does that inform you, and how does that color the way you see the world now?
Well, it's interesting because growing up in Thailand, the school that I went to was International School Bangkok, and 53 languages were spoken at that school, all the kids that went there, the students that went there at the time. So learning a lot of languages, learning a lot of cultures, learning a lot of differences was my norm, okay? It wasn't differences. That was the way it was supposed to be, okay? There were different colors in the bowl, of marbles, if you want to call it that. We were all different cultures, all different languages, all different ways of thinking, but we blended together and we made our own really unique culture. And to this day, my high school has reunions every second year. I try to attend as many as I can because there's always that long-term connection that I have. And I think that it's gotten me to really enjoy. I live in Houston, which is supposed to be one of the most multicultural cities in the U.S., and I really love that. Different cultures, different people, different way of thinking. And that's where I feel the most at home.
Yeah, no, I grew up in Texas, and it's interesting. A lot of people think, oh, it's like not very multicultural. And it always amazes people when I say, well, no, actually, when I was in 4th grade, I started learning Spanish.
Right.
Because that was part of the school curriculum. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, and I said, this was 1963. Okay. This is not 2003.
Right.
And, and so, yes, I can appreciate that Houston is a very multicultural city, even more so now, of course, than it was when I was growing up, as a matter of fact. Where did you go to college? What sort of advanced education do you have?
Well, most of my advanced education is specialized training in the insurance world. Okay, specialized degrees such as certified financial planner, certified chartered advisor in philanthropy, special needs planning, estate planning. That's been most of my specialized education. It's been specifically in financial services. When I came back from Thailand to Canada, I was in the 10th grade. My dad was really sick. He'd had cancer in Thailand. So the last 2 years of his life, I took care of him, 24/7. And that was also part of my upbringing. I got to see and I got to learn. I lost my sister when I was 11 years old in Thailand. She died in an accident. She was killed.
Oh, gosh.
So when I was 14, 15 years old, my dad was really sick. And I just decided I'm going to take care of him. That's it. It wasn't really a decision. It was just something that I did. It was just the right thing. So because of that, unfortunately, I missed out on a lot of other things outside of me. But when I was 16, he passed away. So that was really, really a hard time of my life.
Wow, yeah. I can imagine that it was. Did you decide at that point, I guess it was you and your mom, or?
Me and my mom and my other sister that was still around. So it was the three of us. And we were a German family. So I was the oldest boy, so I was 16 years old and I had to grow up really fast. I mean, I did growing up in Thailand already, but I had to just really grow up really fast. I was in the Army Reserve at the time, and I decided I was going to get my commercial pilot's license and become an air traffic controller.
Oh.
So that's what I did, basically, pretty much fresh out of high school.
That is not an easy job. Fresh out of high school, I was doing radio. I was working at the local radio station before I went off to college.
That's great.
So it's slightly different than being an air traffic controller. Holy smoke, man. How long did you do that?
Did that for about 3.5 years. And, it's interesting, Bill, because there are a lot of jobs where you can make mistakes. Air traffic control is not one of them.
Not one of them.
You have to make instant decisions, and they have to be the right decisions. You can't make a decision. You can't think about it. You can't talk about it. You can't contemplate it. You have to make the right decision. And you've got pilots and passengers whose life depends on you, literally. You have to be 100% on your game, 100% of the time. You can't even use the Orville-Redenbacher formula, 99.4% popped. Because if you're at 99.4, that means there's 0.6 of the population out there that's in danger. So you have to be on your game.
Wow. I mean, was it that pressure that led you to go into another line of work, or?
I think so, yeah. I had a young family at the time, and starting a new career, a high-pressure career, and starting a family at the time was very, very difficult. Yeah. So I put my family first, and, I went that way, and maybe that's because of, what happened early in my childhood. But I always put my family at the center and went off into a different direction. And then eventually that led me to what I'm doing now, because it was the right thing to do, helping families, helping businesses, helping people.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I can see that path. I can see how that path has led you to this point. It's a compelling story. But let me ask you something. If you weren't working, if if somebody came into your office and said, "Here, Ralph, here's a whole bunch of money. You don't have to work anymore. You don't have to do this anymore. Let's pull Ralph out of the professional world." What would Ralph do?
I'd still have to work with people. I mean, yes, I'd probably take more time off. I might take up sailing. I love water skiing because I grew up in the tropics. Mm-hmm. I used to sail a little bit, a lot of things that I don't have time for anymore. And I still have my commercial pilot's license. So I haven't flown for a long time, but I do a lot more of that, for one thing. But I'd still, at the end of the day, I would still want to come back and work with people. I think that I'd still keep doing what I'm doing, but just part-time maybe, and mentor people and train people and bring them along. I've spent my whole life with people, and that's really what makes me wake up in the morning.
So tell me one thing about you that most people probably wouldn't know.
Starting with growing up overseas, that's probably a big part. I've seen healthcare in many different countries, the good and the bad. I've seen all sides of it, and I've been affected by a lot of tragedies due to healthcare. Mm-hmm. And that shapes who I am, but I don't think it shows on the outside. I don't think it comes through other than my passion. Employers, when I talk to an employer, some of the employers just say, hey, look, I just can't afford this. I've got to cut costs. But when I'm with the actual people that are using the healthcare, sometimes I see a different message. So I have to, make something that bridges the gap and fills both needs.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, so what's your idea of success, Ralph?
My idea of success is customer happiness. When I have a client that has a complex problem where they think there's no easy solution, and there is often no easy solution, but usually there is a solution. It's just a matter of studying it hard enough, thinking it through, looking at the alternatives, and just really creating something. Benefits are not a commodity to be just sold on a spreadsheet. They're not widgets. They are highly customizable, and there's always a solution. There's the laws and the regulations we have to stick to, and we have to keep our clients compliant.
Sure.
But once we do that, within that confine, there still usually is a good solution that we can find and create.
So as we get ready to wrap this up, I'm just curious, and this is kind of a nonsensical question, but is there a mantra? Is there a saying? Is there something that's in your mind that you turn to often when you're tackling a difficult problem that you remind yourself of, or that helps you stay focused on task and on purpose?
Yeah, I think so, Bill. As I said, I spent a lot of time in Canada. I'm Canadian originally. My mother lived in Canada until she passed away 3 years ago. Canada has a single-payer universal healthcare system. Mm-hmm. And even in Canada, I did group benefits, but they're very different because they have single-payer major medical. Now, Canada is the only one of 3 countries where it's illegal to pay a doctor. Okay, there's no private healthcare option. It's all the government medicine, and it's controlled by rationing and lack of resources. My mother later in life got really sick. Her blood pressure started going up, and it just didn't seem that there was any reason for it. Her family doctor, who was about 85 years old, had her on high blood pressure medication, and then she went to a naturopath that put her on what he called water pills, which were diuretics. And he said, hey, take this blood pressure medicine, twice a week. You don't need to take it every day. So she did that, which you shouldn't do. You should take it every day.
Right.
Eventually, the doctor said, hey, listen, we got to get you in to get an echo. So he set her up for an echo. It took 7 months to get it. And then it took another 4 months to see a cardiologist. By the time she did, that cardiologist says, hey, we've got to adjust all your meds. So adjusted all the meds. A month later, she wasn't responding. So she called back and she said, I've got to come back in and see the doctor. And they said, no, you saw the cardiologist once. You've got to wait a year. Go back to your family doctor and they can manage your meds. But the family doctor was the one that had her on one pill without the diuretic. So a short while later, she got a letter from the government that said, hey, you qualify for medical assistance in dying. And this was during COVID. And she was a senior. She was isolated. She didn't drive anymore. So she said, well, what's the wait? So anyway, long story short, 13 days later, they came to her house and delivered a lethal dose. It's a very personal story, but I think about it a lot. And when I'm talking to a client, I think about the real things that happen in their lives and the ways that I could help to improve them, whether it's financially, whether it's tax savings, whether it's being more efficient or delivering the real healthcare that they need and the financial advice and consulting that they need. So that's why I get so deep in with my clients. And I take it very personally because it is very personal to me.
That's a powerful story, Ralph. That's a powerful story. And yeah, it is a reminder that, the bottom line of this are people. The bottom line is that they are people. So the people who are listening to this podcast, who are the folks that should reach out to you if they want more information? Are we talking about companies here, or what are we talking about?
We're talking about two distinct sort of, sets of people, brokers that work with companies that want to work with me, where I can be their coach, if you will, sort of behind the scenes. They deal directly with the client, but I'm the one that is training and coaching and giving the resources to that person. I've got a ton of brokers that I work with. Once in a while, I have a client that comes to me directly, and I like keeping in touch as well. I don't take on just any client, but I do to keep me grounded, to keep me focused on what's happening in the real world. I work with a lot of people, as I said, on financial and estate planning, on special needs planning, because I have a nephew that has special needs, areas of philanthropy, business succession planning. So mostly entrepreneurs, company owners, and brokers. I would say that those are the two main people that I work with.
Great. So if anybody who's listening to this podcast wants to reach out to you and have maybe another further conversation or explore things a little bit further, what is the best way for them to do that?
Well, they can send me an email or they can call direct. Either way is fine. I love hearing different people's challenges, what they're facing. And often just by listening really deeply, I can start formulating some ideas and then creating something that's going to solve those issues.
Terrific. Do you want to give the email out? I know things will be in the show notes, so the people who are listening can't write things down right now.
Sure. Yeah. No. You can email me at groups, GROUPS, at root3.com. That's all spelled out, ROUTETHREE.com.
Super. Fantastic. And the other thing, and I mentioned this earlier, is if you're listening to this podcast, hit subscribe. The reason is pretty obvious. When you're a subscriber, you won't miss another episode. You'll be notified when Ralph drops a new episode. You can give it a listen. You won't have to wonder, where did I hear it, or what time did he do this, or any of that. You're notified. You can give it a listen. The other thing I would ask is that if you are listening to this and you like this podcast, tell people about it, please. Word of mouth promotion. Very welcome. We like that tool. That's a good tool, and we would appreciate it very much. Until next time, I am producer Bill Tucker, thanking you on behalf of Ralph for taking the time to listen today. And, well, I would remind you that you can go out today and make today a great day or not. The choice, my friend, is yours. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to the Benefit Whisperer podcast. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Looking to reach out? Visit our website at www.thebenefitwhisperer.com or give us a call at 832-924-3330. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of the Benefit Whisperer. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be used as a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.